What is going on YouTube? Gabons here and welcome to episode 43 of the Tech Pills bi-weekly live stream. So let's start right with the first news of today. openSUSE Leap will be one-to-one compatible with SLES. So openSUSE Leap has always been to SLES what Fedora is to Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Ultimately based on the same technology, but radically different, as Leap and Fedora are more bleeding edge compared to their enterprise counterparts, serving as a sort of a testing ground for what's to come. This will totally change starting with openSUSE Leap 15.3, which is currently still in beta. openSUSE Leap will now be identical to SLES, not unlike what CentOS used to be to RHEL. Of course, now the situation is quite different with CentOS moving to a different direction with CentOS Stream, so take this similarity or comparison with the appropriate point of view, I guess. This poses an interesting opportunity for people and companies that are evaluating SLES for their projects, as they can effectively bootstrap their infrastructure on top of openSUSE and then upgrade, so to speak, to SLES for support if and only if they feel the need to. So you can build your infrastructure on openSUSE, you can target that as your target operating system, and then if you need to do an actual enterprise deployment where support is actually important to you, then you can just use SLES and you're basically going to build on top of the same thing. SUSE is probably one of the least appreciated Linux distros in the enthusiast community, at least that's the impression that I've got, except for some small niches, I guess. But again, apart from, its niche of actual fans, it also has its niche of enterprise and government deployments, and it's nice to see them moving in this direction. I think this will ultimately benefit the company and the sales in particular as well. For all of you lizards out there who like to live on the bleeding edge, Tumbleweed, the rolling release version of openSUSE, will stay the same, so there shouldn't be any particular change as far as Tumbleweed goes. And honestly, I think it's nice to see openSUSE moving in this direction. Having just two versions now of effectively two versions of SUSE, of their operating system, is a great idea. You have a rolling release model distribution with Tumbleweed that's more suited for desktop users and power users in general, and then you have a more let's call it stable, or at least a slower moving version with Leap, and now that it's going to be identical to SLES, you will have just basically two different branches that you have to track as far as openSUSE goes. So if you need the stability or the long-term support of something like regular openSUSE or SLES, you can just go with Leap and then upgrade to SLES if you feel the need to. And if you're a desktop user, if you do, I don't know, gaming, or you have new and bleeding edge hardware, or you need or want to use bleeding edge software, you can just go with Tumbleweed, and that's always been the case. So I'm really happy to see they moving. I'm really happy to see them moving in this direction. I only hope that they give Tumbleweed a little bit more love, because now I'm not an openSUSE user, so all I know about Tumbleweed, or Leap for that matter, is from other people experience. So what I know is that Tumbleweed has some instabilities, mainly related to the fact that Tumbleweed shares some of the infrastructure and tooling of regular openSUSE Leap, but it's not really, this tooling is not really 100% compatible with Tumbleweed. So I'm hoping that they work on that and bring Tumbleweed to an actual, I don't want to say usable, because this would imply that Tumbleweed is not usable, and I know it is usable, but I mean to a more approaching stable and user-friendly experience. So I'm hoping that Tumbleweed moves that way, now that Leap is practically out of the way, now that they only have to maintain effectively one other version of openSUSE. All right, let's switch gears. We just talked about openSUSE. Let's talk about Ubuntu. Now, Ubuntu decided to commit to Flutter even more. In one of the previous episodes, we talked about how Canonical decided that Ubuntu was going to base their new installer on Flutter. And if you don't know what Flutter is, it's a toolkit for building desktop applications, and it's developed by Google. It's open source, and it's to write Flutter applications, you have to use the Dart language, which again is from Google. So quite a big commitment in the Google ecosystem from Canonical side, and now they're committing to this even more with their announcement. With an announcement that every new Ubuntu application will be built on Flutter. Let's move to the chat real quick. Oh, I actually forgot to update the chat today. Well, it happens. Give me just a second. Okay, that should do it. So let's move to the chat real quick. Our Gaia Mondal says, just like Debian Unstable, though it's called unstable but stable enough for daily driver. Yes, this is quite a good comparison in my opinion. Debian Unstable, I don't think it's actually meant to be used as a daily driver. I know that many people do, but it doesn't detract to the fact that Debian Unstable is made for actual Debian developers and people who actually are testing the newest, most bleeding edge stuff. And because of the fact that Debian is super stable, even the unstable version is quite usable. But I think that Tumbleweed is actually meant for actual end users compared to Debian Unstable. So that's kind of a weird comparison, but at the same time kind of fitting. Yeah, if you're looking for a Debian rolling release distro, you could give Debian Unstable a try, and maybe that works for you. All right, let's move back to Ubuntu. So they decided that every new application that will be built for Ubuntu, so built in-house by Canonical for the Ubuntu distro, will be developed with Flutter. And this is kind of weird, to be honest. One of the possible reasons behind this choice could be that it's probably easier to find Flutter developers for hire rather than GTK or Qt developers. At the same time, I know that the Linux community is full of very talented people, apart from myself. I mean, I'm not the only one developing GTK applications, but I know many people out there are developing GTK applications. And unless they are otherwise employed, which I honestly don't know, it's not like there's a lack of GTK or Qt developers for that matter. So I'm not really sure. This could be one of the possible reasons why, because as being a Google technology, Flutter is pretty popular. So them building their new desktop infrastructure on top of Flutter makes it probably easier or more approachable for third-party developers or developers that never actually approached developing on Linux to port their applications, or to think about using Flutter and having Linux as a first-class citizen with day one support for their apps. So this could be a reason why we're seeing this kind of choice from Canonical side. If there are no other reasons, I think that the Linux world, in the Linux world, we have some of the best UI toolkits out there, and particularly with GTK, but admittedly, I am a GTK developer, so I might be a little biased there. But even if you look at Qt, it's pretty good. It's a very good toolkit. The only real reason why I'm leaving Qt kind of out of the picture here for a minute is their new licensing model is even more problematic than it used to be. So it's kind of in a weird spot, and maybe this could be one of the reasons. Back when Ubuntu and Canonical were working on the Ubuntu Touch project, now it's now in the hands of the community. They decided to build their tooling on top of Qt and QML. So it's not like they didn't try to stick to the native toolkits. Admittedly, they had to build an entire new toolkit on top of QML because basically the Ubuntu Touch toolkit was not really, but in a way, kind of a from scratch toolkit. So it's kind of not invented the syndrome in a way. Now they're moving to Flutter. They have been in the forefront of Linux support for Flutter since, well, it's been a while now. They actually contributed to making Flutter apps work on Linux, and they're basically building this tooling around Flutter and around the snaps, which makes sense. It's their stack, so they're building it all on top of their technologies. And at the same time, there are still some little issues that need to be sorted out, like Flutter on Linux still doesn't have support for multiple windows, and other little things and paper cuts that need to be sorted out. But apparently, they're working closely with Google to to solve these issues. So I think they will be solved for by the time Flutter is actually viable as a toolkit on the desktop. Personally, to be honest, I think they would have been better off with GTK. I know that GTK is a little bit old style when you look at what developers are learning and what new developers are doing at this day and age. It's quite different from the kind of the way that GTK works. GTK is a bit old. It dates back to 1998 and it's written in C, but it's also at the same time decently easy to pick up. And I mean, if you've done front-end development of any sort, every kind of front-end development is similar to each other. So there's this kind of thing here. And all the more, GTK supports a variety of programming languages, so it's not like you're stuck with C. As a matter of fact, I know very few people that actually write new GTK apps in C, because that doesn't really make sense, because C is a very low-level language. It's hard to work with, and it's very prone to human error. Because it lets you do basically whatever you want. So building an application with a segmentation fault, or with various kind of vulnerabilities like buffer overflows and other kind of memory problems is typical of C apps or C software. So it makes sense that most people don't use C to develop GTK apps. At the same time, it's possible to write GTK apps with many languages, as I was saying before, like Python, which is personally my favorite language at this moment, and JavaScript, that includes, of course, TypeScript, and also Rust, which is a new, very popular programming language. And there are lots and lots of bindings out there for other languages. Recently, I've discovered that there are also bindings for Java, weirdly enough. And it's not like I really like Java. I don't really have good feelings for Java myself. But it's possible to write GTK3 apps with Java. And funnily enough, it's also compatible with Scala. Scala is... Oh, sorry for that. Scala is a functional programming language that's built on top of the Java virtual machine. So it's kind of a dialect of Java, but it's also kind of not, because it's its own language. It just happens to run on the same runtime that Java does. So it makes it possible to write GTK3 apps using the Java libraries, which is quite cool. And well, I mean, enough nerding about GTK. I don't know. The only thing that I really want to see here is if they're going to stick with Flutter, I would want to see a good support for the language for everything that's outside of the Ubuntu, exclusively Ubuntu word. So if they're gonna write a Flutter app for Ubuntu, I want to see that compatible with other distributions, including Fedora, including Red Hat, including Arch, of course. Unless they do that, I think that this could be wasted effort. If they just try to target their platform, which is something that they could do and that they've previously done with things like Snap, which is technically, yes, compatible with other distributions, but it really doesn't work very well. I made a video about that quite some time ago. Snap doesn't actually work very well on distributions other than Ubuntu and few others. And with Unity previously, the Unity desktop was really only packaged for Ubuntu, and having it run on anything else was basically a nightmare because they were applying many downstream patches to core, I don't want to say system, but very close to system packages that were needed to run Unity. So running Unity on anything but Ubuntu was practically impossible unless you were willing to break your system, basically. So again, what I'm hoping to see here is them working on Flutter for Linux, not just Flutter for Ubuntu. I don't know. The only other thing that I'm really curious about here is what kind of apps is Canonical thinking about when they were making this announcement. What's to come for Ubuntu? What new applications could we expect from Ubuntu? Because up to this point, they've only focused on infrastructure and, I mean, the installer and the packages and the package manager and Snap. That's a big deal. What actual apps could they be working on? I'm quite curious about that. If you have any opinions, let me know in the comments or in the chat. Speaking of the chat, let's move back to the chat for a second. Argaia says again, there are already many Flutter developers in the market. There will be a good chance that they can provide some good support to the open source world. Yes, exactly. That was part of my point. It's probably possible that they are looking to, I don't know, they're probably looking to a wider ecosystem, to a wider developer base with this announcement. They want to bring outside developers to the Ubuntu ecosystem. So this kind of does make sense. All right, let's move on to the next news of today. TZ is a nice little tool to compare time zones. So as long as I've known English, I've always been working with time zones, and dealing with US time zones in particular is something that I find deeply annoying, and I've never been bothered to understand how they actually work. And whenever I need to convert a certain time to another time zone, I always resort to some website that honestly doesn't really do a good job of presenting the information I need. The other day, when I was browsing Mastodon, I found this little tool called TZ. This is a small terminal app written in Go and configurable through a simple environment variable as described in their README. It shows the current hour for your time zone and for all the other time zones you want to see. And you know what? Let me actually share the screen here for a second because I really want to show you what this is all about. All right. So here we have terminal, of course. ZSH doesn't really play well with resizing terminals. This is something I've been quite used to for a while. So just run TZ here and you get this little GUI here, or TUI to be more precise. It just shows you, well, when you first launch it, and let me clear the screen here. When you first launch it, of course, it shows you your current time. It's 17 or 5 p.m. right now, or 5:18. It shows the current hour, and then the current hour converted to the other time zones that you have configured. And I have configured 3 US time zones here just for the sake of it. And as you see here, you can just move the cursor with arrow keys. Does it support? Yeah, it does support Vim bindings, which is quite cool. And then just press Q to quit. And one of the nice things that I really like about this is that they color code the particular hours in the day to let you see more easily what time of day it is. So this is kind of night from 20 to 6 a.m. So from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. it's night. From 7 to 8 a.m. it's like early morning, and then 9 to 17 or 9 to 5 is like your typical work hours, and then you have 18, 19, or 6 and 7 p.m. which are I guess evening. People typically dine at this time most of the world, and then you have night. So you can easily, with just a glance, see what time of day it is. So if I just want to, for instance, say I want to schedule a live stream, and I don't know that 5 is a good time for US based people to watch me. So I just open TZ and I just look at the colors, and I try and find a time slot that's all yellow all the way down. So apparently 5 p.m. in my area is the perfect time. If I wanted to do it in the evening, I could go with, I don't know, from 8 to 11 p.m. is probably fine. I wouldn't do it any farther down because, of course, being too late, get tired. I'm not so funny anymore. But anyway, it's quite cool. As you see here, it's a very simple little app. You can toggle the date if you have like time zones that are really far apart. You can see when a day starts and when a day ends, which is quite cool. And it's all configurable with a simple environment variable. So the environment variable is tz_list, and you just configure that by using the time zone names separated by commas, and then when you launch tz, you see all the time zones that you actually have selected in the tz list environment variable. And of course, you can export this in your shell configuration file. So you don't really need an extra configuration file just for tz, which is quite cool. It's a different way of using a program. We're not typically used to that. At least I'm not really used to using a program with configured by environment variables, unless it's a compiler, then that's a different story. But again, it's quite cool. You can find it on GitHub. It's open source. It's github.com/oz/tz. I will leave the link in the chat right now. So if you are on Arch, you can install the tz package from the AUR, and that follows the app releases, or you can install the bleeding edge tz-git package that tracks the main branch of the repo and is maintained by yours truly. So you have your usual options as an Arch user right there if you're using the AUR. All right, let's move on to the next news of today. Audacity 3.0 has just been released, and it brings a new file format, which is quite cool. It doesn't sound as interesting as it actually is, but let's dive right into it. So if you've ever used Audacity, you know one of the biggest problems with it is the fact that when saving a project, it's just split across multiple files. Plus, if you're importing any kind of external audio files and you try and move those audio files after the fact, the project that just gets broken because it cannot find the project files, because it wasn't actually copying in any of the files that you were giving it. It was just referencing the file path of whatever file you were dragging into it. So this changes in version 3.0. And they worked on migrating the save format to a new file called AUP3 compared to the previous format called just AUP. This new format stores all of the audio files and related data within itself. This obviously results in a bigger file, but also makes it much easier for different kind of scenarios that were previously not possible. Like, for instance, having multiple people working on the same project, or the same person working across different machines. If you open an old project with Audacity 3.0, it will be automatically converted to AUP3 so that you don't have to worry about losing your work that you've previously done. Other changes in 3.0 include a ton of bug fixes, which is always highly appreciated, and as well as improvements to the noise gate effect and a new analyzer tool to label sounds and silences, which is something that personally I always do in Audacity. It's probably the 90% of the things that I do in Audacity is just use the noise suppression tool, and being able to just apparently automatically labeling noise and silence is actually quite cool. It's great to see good progress on what is single-handedly the most popular audio editing tool out there, and not just for beloved Linux, but across all platforms. These changes bring Audacity closer to a professional digital audio workstation. And of course, there are still many things along the way to match other tools, particularly, and this is a personal gripe of mine, a better system to manage inputs and output devices, which is currently kind of buggy and finicky. I still have to try 3.0. Hopefully they fix some of those issues, but the way that they manage devices with Audacity, it's just half of the time it doesn't work, and when it works, it's just never reliable. So I really hope that they fix that, and probably with version 4, I don't know, probably 3.1, 3 point something. I really want this to be high on their priority list, fixing support for audio devices right now. This is probably the most important thing for me. Anyway, let's move on to the next news of today. GNOME 40 releases on March 24th. Let's see what we can expect. So, I've been talking about GNOME 40 for a while now. I've shown you screenshots and mockups and all that there was to show you. And of course, the most striking new stuff is about the new look and feel. It's not actually all that distant from what GNOME used to be, so from 3.38. It's mostly basically the same. The most of what has changed is in the dash or the overview area. First off, the new dash is actually quite cool because the way it shows you the big workspaces, like it just shows you, well, your workspace and the one on the left and one on the right, but it's very easy to switch from to and from them, particularly if you're using something like a touchscreen or a trackpad. And speaking of trackpads and touchscreens, GNOME 40 actually introduces a new touchpad and touch gestures, which actually, in all honesty, make me want to use a trackpad on my desktop, which is quite weird. I love mice, and I don't really find myself at home with trackpads. But these new gestures, I mean, they're hot. They're just plain hot. The changes that they've made to the dash are actually quite disruptive. So the whole idea of GNOME Shell up to this point was a vertical workflow. So you had a vertical dash on the left, you had vertical workspaces on the right, and you had this stack in your head of things like different workspaces, different points in the stack, and then you had, of course, each workspace is a stack in and of itself, considering Windows stack on top of each other. So this kind of nested vertical workflow, which was kind of nice. And now they just moved to a, well, in a way more traditional, but also more mainstream and possibly easier to understand horizontal workflow. And for the workspaces, I still have to get used to it. And yes, I am using it right now because I'm a crazy person. I installed the git release of GNOME 40 from the AUR, and up to this point it's working really nicely. So I can give you some first impressions right here. Switching to a horizontal workspace workflow is kind of weird to me, particularly because, well, I was never a big workspace user. I use workspaces when I just have one monitor. That's very useful. But when I have two monitors, I typically prefer to arrange them between the two monitors instead of using multiple workspaces. Hopefully this can change, because I realize that my desktop gets quite messy quite fast. So I don't know, maybe having horizontal workspaces works better for human beings. I don't know. There must be a reason why they decided to make this change, apart from the fact that it's more familiar, because again, every other desktop environment, including the ones in Windows and Mac OS, use horizontal workspaces. So that does make sense if you think about it. Um, about having the dash or dock or whatever you want to call it on the bottom, I actually quite like that, and I always have liked my dock on the bottom. I always put it there, and it just feels more comfortable. You have more space for more icons, and the icons that fit there are actually bigger and feel less crammed, which is quite cool. And the only gripe I have is that I prefer to have the dock always visible without having to go to the overview, and that's why extensions like dash to dock or dash to panel are must-haves for me. And sadly, at this point, neither of them work in GNOME 40 as of right now, which is, again, sad. Hopefully they can sort out the compatibility with GNOME 40 soon, because I really need my dock. I really need my pull app dock on the bottom. I don't want to go to the overview to see my applications. Anyway, for everything else, I really have to say it. Nice work, guys. Nice work, because animations are as smooth as they've never been as smooth as they are now. They just look good, and the timings are right, and they just feel natural, and it's a pleasure to see like the overview animation. It doesn't take too long. It doesn't take too long or too short of a time. At the same time, they're pleasing, and they convey the message of what they're showing. The gray in the whole dash slash overview area, I think it gets boring after a while. I don't really love it too much. Maybe having like a dim or a blurred wallpaper of some kind, or a texture like instead of the gray would be a little bit better. But I don't know. They probably worked on it quite a lot, and if they have better alternatives, I'm sure that they will try to introduce them in future versions. And of course, we have extensions, so let's see what comes with the new wave of GNOME 40 extensions. Now, corners are heavily rounded, which is quite different, and yeah, it makes for a different kind of look. No other desktop environment has so many rounded corners that I know of. Probably iPadOS has so many rounded corners, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like a different thing. Of course, this is, as far as I know, this is a kind of a novel design. It's not really something that's already been done before. So really cool stuff here. We're finally innovating again in the Linux desktop ecosystem, which is quite great. And by the way, we've always been the innovators. I mean, even workspace is something that's as standard now as anything can get. Workspaces were Linux first, and Linux desktop environments first. Honestly, I have to say, after using it for a while, I don't think it's too big of a departure from 3.38. It feels like an incremental upgrade. It feels like a refinement, apart from the whole overview area, which is quite daunting the first time that you see it. But after, a couple minutes, you start to realize, well, it's the same thing. It's just this used to be here and this used to be there, but it's basically the same. I don't see the core GNOME experience changing as radically as I thought from 3.38, which it's not a bad thing in and of itself. It means that this workflow that we have grown to get used to works and will continue to work probably for time and time to come. The biggest thing you will have to wrap your head around, again, as I said, is moving from like an horizontal stacking workflow from a vertical stacking workflow to an horizontal workflow. Kind of messes me with my head a little bit, but apart from that, it's pretty cool stuff. I'm really happy to see such a polished version for such a big release of GNOME, and I'm really happy with this release. Hopefully my extensions, my beloved extensions, will come back soon, because I really want to have Dash to Dock again. Anyway, guys, this is gonna wrap it up for today's episode. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you like this video, please make sure to press the thumbs up button down there. Also, remember to subscribe to my channel for more of this. And remember to join the TechPills community at techpills.technology/community. You can find the links in the description, as well as these nice QR codes on the left side of the screen. You can use right now. You can join the Telegram group, the Telegram channel if you just want to receive notifications, or you can join the Matrix channel, I guess. Matrix room, let's call it room. You can join the Matrix room and the Discord server. I do not endorse Discord anymore myself because I don't really like it. I don't really like what they have been doing privacy-wise as of late. I still have the channel because I understand that many people like it and love to use it. I do have a TechPills Discord server if you want to join that. In any case, whichever channel, communication channel you want to join, they are all bridged together thanks to the magic of Matrix. Real quick before wrapping this up, let's jump right back to the chat. Our guy again says, being a Cinnamon user, will Cinnamon add support for GTK4 any sooner? Well, GTK4 works everywhere. You don't really need support from the desktop environment to use GTK4. So there's that. You can use GTK4 apps right now with no issues. If you're asking if Cinnamon will port to GTK4, you will have to ask a Cinnamon developer because they, as far as I know, haven't said anything about this, and GTK3 is still a pretty good toolkit at this point. So if they feel the need to port to GTK4, they probably will. If they don't feel the need to, they won't. It's as easy as that. I don't think it really makes too much sense to think too much about the versions of the toolkits because GTK3 is a modern toolkit. At this point, at this day, it's still a modern toolkit. GTK4 is better in many ways, but doesn't make GTK3 any less of what it already is. Alright guys, again, thank you very, very much for watching. Join the community. I will see you in the next one.